this computer. Yes. All right. I think it's working. I hope. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for joining. This is wonderful. Again, for those of you who are just joining, I want to let you know that this is going to be recorded, and you'll see my eyes kind of dart from various places because I've got a couple of monitors on the go. I think it might be a good opportunity just to step back a little bit before we get underway, just to kind of set the stage and allow me a chance to say a few things just to kind of get our bearings or where we're going. And I want to thank you for joining us. And these are really, really unusual, stressful times. And if you've happened to have got a loved one who's suffered from COVID-19 or any of your colleagues, I'm deeply, deeply sorry for that. And I hope that you can find the strength and reach out to others that might give you some support if you may need it. My wife has lost some family members already in Italy, and we're doing our best to cope, which is really sad, but it's a fact of our lives now, unfortunately. So the reason why I'm doing this is because I've heard reports that colleagues, our extended colleagues in natural history museums and collections, and all of our extended family members have not only lost family members, they may have lost employment. And there have been signs already that there have been layoffs in museums and collections, and this is really sad. That's a sign potentially of things to come. And budgets are under a crunch, and we're trying to get our bearings. Thanks, Deb. I'll keep my head still, so I'm not going to move around as much as I can. Those of us that have public faces to our museums and our collections are under particular crunch in our budgets, trying to find our way. And this is going to be a big problem over the next year or more, how we fit into this landscape of our changing times. Those of us that do work for museums and collections and we're sitting at home oftentimes don't have access to our own data because they're behind firewalls at our institutions or the infrastructure is not quite in place. And so I thought this might be an occasion to try and do what we can with the resources that are at our disposal to try and make some progress in a non-stressful way as much as possible. So who this is geared for is those individuals that have data already shared out to GBIF and might be fishing for ways to make some sort of a meaningful contribution. And when work resumes, an opportunity to try and ensure that whatever we do when we're away from work for these next months, hopefully not years, we have an opportunity to take advantage of some of the things that we might be engaged in doing that are kind of peripheral to our immediate interests in museums and collections. So who I am, I'm Dave Shorthouse. I work for the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and I'm not here representing my institution or my affiliations in any way, although I'm sure they may be pleased that I'm doing something to try and engage with a wider community. There I am on Twitter, DPS Spiders, and I also have another Twitter account, Bloodhound Track, which some of you may have heard about, and I'll be talking a little bit about that as well. So what I'm attempting to do here is talk about the round trip and whatever the heck that is. So while we're away from work, what can we do to try and make sure that we can make some connections with folk, make connections with our own data, and then take advantage of whatever we're doing offline or online while at home and push something of value back into our holdings. And this notion of a round trip has been featured relatively recently in our ideas of how we share data. And it's ultimately about connections. It's about how we expand the breadth of our data in ways that might enhance our data and our connections with the outside world. So if we want to get going on our trip, we need a packing list. So the question is, who is this for? Why am I doing this? Well, the target audience initially is for those who have share their data out with a global biodiversity information facility. And many of you are members of institutions that do that. Some of you may not have yet had an opportunity to do that. So you're welcome to get a sense of what it is that we might be able to do while we're away from work. And in particular, this is about people and the data in our collections about people. And why? Well, because as I mentioned a bit earlier in the introduction, we have a trajectory or an angle within our data that has not, in my opinion, been fully explored as much as it could. And that is about the collectors, the determiners, the individuals responsible for building our collections. There's an opportunity here to make connections with a much broader community that is not necessarily science-driven, but nonetheless of equal importance in my mind. And let's do what we can to make sure that we can expand our breadths of interests to the people represented in our collections. So what are our goals and expectations? Well, my goal is to ensure that you have learned something here within the next hour, something very simple, something low stress, something that can keep yourself occupied over the next little while, little month or so, and feel connected to the outside world in some way. And you don't feel isolated. And there's a number of ways that we can do this as a community. I draw your attention to at least one blog that resonated with me that Deb Paul shared a little while ago, and one that I think is worth reading. And I'll share some of these links I might be putting in my slides as we go forth, so that I'll put this in a document, or someone can put that in the document on my behalf. Museums are about connections. They're not just about the physical entities, it's about reaching out to the outside world. And this is an interesting blog post written by Steve Lubar at Brown University. And now, preparing for this trip, we also have to buy some luggage. And so by luggage, I mean some stuff that's happened in the recent past when we think about data about people in our collections. And there's been at least 2 or 3 workshops that I draw your attention to. How do we unequivocally define the identity for a particular person that might be mentioned in specimen data? And so one of these workshops happened in Sofia, Bulgaria in March of 2019. Another one recently in Poland, and yet another one in Biodiversity Next conference in October of 2019. With a couple of useful workshops and a symposium session that some of you here in attendance were there. So there's an interesting breadth of abstracts associated with that, our collective thoughts about how we share data about people in our collections data. And the first connecting flight on our trip, apologies if I'm swinging things around here, you can't quite see what's going on. I'll do my best to keep still. The first connecting flight is GBIF. Recently, as in immediately recently, the last hour, if you will, GBIF have introduced 2 new terms in the way in which they handle data. And this was just rolled out about an hour ago in production. And that is these 2 terms called identified by ID and recorded by ID. These are in production now in the Integrated Publishing Toolkit. So if you're a member of an institution, you're sharing data, there's an opportunity here to put identifiers for people associated with identifying specimens or recording or observing or, collecting specimens. And so here's our first connecting flight, is that we're starting to get a sense of how the data might be shared in this loop. And there's an opportunity to put data in those terms and have it appear at GBIF. The second connecting flight is Wikidata, and this is a part of the core of what I wanted to get into today, and learn a few basic tricks. And so you might have heard about Wikidata. Many of you here are Wikidata folk and are intimately familiar with it. But what I want to try and do is target those who might not necessarily be familiar with Wikidata and want to get a foothold in what's going on. I'm sure you know of Wikipedia, but Wikidata is a little different, and it's not necessarily information in multilingual prose the way Wikipedia is. Instead, the mandate of Wikidata is to share atoms of shared descriptions. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that Wikidata is about collecting statements of fact. So for example, Mary, as an item in Wikidata, has an occupation, which we might call a property, a botanist, and a value of that property. And those kinds of triples, if you will, item, property, value, are stored within Wikidata. And exploded out to the masses and made use in most amazing ways. And so we can also think of Wikidata as a broker of external identifiers, allowing the opportunity to put those identifiers for people or properties in a way that can be reused in a very, very flexible way. The technology stack behind Wikidata is quite complicated, and I don't want to belabor this point much. It's merely an expression here. What I'm attempting to show is that Wikidata has users, tools, third parties, a whole suite of caching mechanisms to make things go really fast as possible. And way down deep in the back end are things like relational databases and MySQL, and this thing called Blaze Graph, which is this triple store of holding those statements, and a search interface to allow things to go really quickly and be very pleasing for the end user. And so we've got users, we've got tools and third parties that make this whole rich ecosystem that allows us to do so many wonderful things. And in a remarkable way, allow us to interact with Wikidata for those that might not have that technological background or technical skills in a way that is very pleasing, even myself included. And so what I wanted to do is step out of this discussion of Wikidata in a way that, if I put yourself in the shoes of someone who's wanting to contribute something to Wikidata. And so how do we begin that? Well, and I'll put Siobhan on the spot here. Siobhan has been wonderful in her way of expressing how she goes about doing the things that she does in making contributions to Wikidata. And I'll put some of these links to her tweets as a way of illustrating how she goes about doing what she does in her workflow. And so I want to try and emulate that a little bit in real time here as best we can. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes with my own carry-on luggage. I'm going to bring my own baggage to this ecosystem. And my alma mater is the University of Alberta when I was there for a number of years. And there's a number of natural history groups and folk who are wonderful. There's this entity called the Alberta Lepidopterist Guild. And these kinds of natural history groups and entities exist the world over. And I'm familiar with this one because I have a prof there who is a member of the Alberta Lepidopterist Guild. And I came across this gentleman by the name of Kenneth Bowman. And so I'm going to copy Kenneth Bowman. Apparently Kenneth Bowman was a well-known lepidopterist, but I don't know much about him. But I would like to see has he got any specimens. And so the first place I might go might be GBIF. I go search around for Kenneth Bowman specimens. I might go again to Wikidata. Is there an item for Kenneth Bowman? And let's see if I can find him. So can I get some of you to nod if you see this Wikidata page on my screen at the moment? You cannot see it? All right, let's see. I probably have to stop sharing my screen and share it again, unfortunately, because it looks like I have to kind of step away from that. Let's share this instead. Share screen. I'll do that. Better? Good, okay. So Kenneth Bowman. Have we got something in Wikidata for Kenneth Bowman? British rally co-driver. That's probably not the Kenneth Bowman I'm searching for. Let's, instead of doing that autocomplete, I'll just kind of go here into the immediate search results. Increase that text size. Is that better? See that? Good, okay. Kenneth Bowman, British rally co-driver, not likely. Kenneth Bowman, English rugby league footballer, probably not. Kenneth Bowman Watson, the Canadian World War I flying ace, probably not. So it seems like Kenneth Bowman doesn't exist in Wikidata. So I gotta make something, gotta make a new item. So let's add Kenneth Bowman. There's Kenneth Bowman. We'll call him a Canadian amateur lepidopterist. Okay, some aliases if I know anything about Kenneth Bowman. Maybe I could put K. Bowman if I know that his name is featured in the literature or elsewhere as K. Bowman. So there, I've made my first page. And I see a chat here, somebody trying to get in touch with me. No. Okay, anyway, I'll get back to it. So, Canadian amateur lepidopterist. So now his very first skeletal entry in Wikidata, and I want to make some statements about him that I know about. So here, I could say he's an instance of a human. Oops, human. Here you go. I'm building these triples as I'm doing this. Another statement. Sex or gender. Kenneth was male. Incidentally, I know Kenneth has passed away a number of years ago, but I don't know when. Occupation. Let's see if we got lepidopterist. Let's call it collector. Collector. His hobby is collecting things. Sure. Date of birth. How do we find Kenneth Bowman's date of birth? Well, we can go back to some resources that I know about. Go searching through Google, try and find some statements about Kenneth Bowman. And this is where the advantage of local knowledge, the advantage of those natural history societies is really, really important. And so you bring your own baggage to this when you're thinking of how to make contributions to Wikidata. And so I'm going to find the Alberta Lepidopterists Guild PDF document that they've written a little while back. Kenneth Bowman, Alberta Lepidopterist. You see that? Everyone see that PDF nod? Yeah, good. And so I need a date of birth here. Born. That's his father. Kenneth Bowman was born 6th of March, 1875. I'm gonna add that. There we go. I'm gonna add a reference to that PDF. I'm copying things out and pasting them here. Add a reference. Stated in, or URL, might be another one, a reference URL. And there's the PDF. I'll publish that. Go back to that document, say, when might have Kenneth died? Does it say? There's a whole family history here. Here we go. Kenneth, if you read through this, died 25th of September 1955 at the age of 80. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm interested in the given names, last names, date of birth, because I want to try and stitch this into Bloodhound, which I'll be talking about in a moment. So date of death, 25th September 1955. So I'll add that. I'll add another reference to that URL. So thanks for watching through this. Oop. Where are we? I lost my spot. Ah, there we go. Kenneth. URL. So I hope you're getting a sense of how easy this is. Some of you have done this before, but it's really quite fascinating how easy this is to build this up. So now I know something about Kenneth Bowman, pardon me. He's a human, he's male, he's a collector, got date of birth, date of death, and I'll just keep adding stuff like this, little facts, little statements like this that I come across and I'll put on the page. And I'll get back to that in a moment. So let me stop sharing again, because apparently I have to go back to my page of where I can get back to my presentation. Share screen. Where are we? There we are. Good. Carry on luggage. So next connecting flight, how might we, in fact, before we get to that, I wonder if we can step back a little bit and invite somebody else in to give their sense of what Wikidata might be used, how we might use Wikidata in a way that is not just simply adding entries like that. What else can we do to add content or to access content in Wikidata once it's in there? And I know there was somebody who wanted to join us, and it was David Fickmuller from BGBM. And I'm going to turn it over to you, David, and show us how you can query Wikidata. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to David.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, David. Share my screen. So David just gave you a brief overview on how Wikidata items are created, the basic elements to start with. And I'm going to take you now to the other side of Wikidata, getting data out of it, or maybe just querying the data in the first place. But first, we're going to take another look. So Kenneth should. What was the last Bowman?
Bowman, right.
Did I spell this correct? Sorry. S.
B-O-W-M-A-N.
Oh, B-A-N, M-A-N.
Oh, M-A-N, sorry, my mistake. Ah, there. That's probably not in the index yet. Oh, no, it's sorry. Sorry, it doesn't appear in the index yet. But let's just, I mean, just for the sake, let's just take the rugby player. So these are the structures you've just seen, and the kind of things that you currently didn't see because it's kind of underneath it all is that those triples are noted in a particular way. So you've already seen that an article or an item, as it's called in Wikidata, is always having such a Q number, a Q and a number, and that's the identifier for each item. And when you go at the statements, each of the statements has a property and a value. And the statements that we just see the text also have their own identifiers. So here we have a property and it has number P31. And those numbers are kind of important for the next step. So I'm giving you this brief view. And here the statement then connects to another item, Q5, human, and they're pretty much structured the same way. So you have the property with a P number, and then properties can point to other items, can point to URLs, can be dates, as we've seen, can be text for certain names, things like that. So with that knowledge, we are now going to the query interface. So this is an interface where you can write to the data that is within Wikidata, and the problem is that it uses the Sparkle query language, and Sparkle is unfortunately quite complicated and not as easy to look at, but I will keep this brief and simple. So I'm only touching the very basics. So for this query interface, query.wikidata.org, there's luckily some auto completions. So we start with a basic query, select, and when you press Control and space, it gives you first item. It gives you this basic structure. So anything we write in here, and now we want to query for person, and we want to let's say we want to have a person who is let's say a biologist. So we want to find all of the people who are biologists. So then we type WDT. I'm not going into the abbreviations. You just have to trust me that this is the way to do it. And so we want to search for what is the occupation, and we have autocomplete, and so we have here occupation as the property. It's sorry, was it highlighted? It's P106, and then we can query for so WD, and we were looking for biologist. So again, we use the autocomplete. Biology, biologist, and click the number here, and we can run the query. And you see there are, can you see this? There are 8,962 biologists within Wikidata. So if we select one of them here, oh, Carl Linnaeus was the first one. That's, I didn't plan that. It was just the first one got returned. Yeah, we are now seeing only those Q numbers. So of course, the next simple step would be to say, okay, I want to see the names here as well. So there's a special service for Wikidata that adds labels. But now you have to say, okay, person and person name, person label.
With a capital L, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, with a capital L. And the query now unfortunately takes a bit longer, but you see then, you see now all of the people here with all of the labels. And the fun thing is when you start writing queries that are more complex. So we want to find person. So we want to narrow this down. Let's say we want to see all of the all of the biologists within Wikidata that, for instance, yeah, have the what is it called? The country nationality, no, yeah, country of citizenship. So let's say we want to see all of the Canadian yeah, people. So we say, okay, we have the same person, WT, country citizenship, and WD. So we're now narrowing these queries down. Not less, but oh, I just remember. But this is not everything. So if we, for instance, have the somebody who is marked as, let's say, a botanist. Well, if we look into Wikidata, botanist is in there. Person who practices botany, and we see. Botanist is a subclass of biologist, but currently we are not querying the subclasses, so we can then extend the query to say anything that is either, my internet connection is a bit unstable, sorry, subclass of, so this that says anything that is any kind of subclass or subclass of a subclass of biologists, and we should now, once I run this, be able to find a lot more. So this is kind of the way to query data. Or all of a sudden we have 1,122 Canadian biologists. And once you have this data, in the end, you can download it, for instance, as a CSV file or tab separated values, and yeah, then yeah, that's an old file. So this is the data that I just got as a return, and I could do some processing on my side. Again, this is only a really brief overview. The query languages can get quite complex. If you want to take a further look at it, I'd suggest you select the examples here. There's some nice ones, or even, especially when writing own queries, it's always helpful to go to the Wikidata page of example queries. And this is quite an intensive list. We find all kinds of really interesting examples, and we see all of the mechanisms that Sparkle offers, and yeah, how they are used. So maybe if you have any interesting queries, send it to me in the chat, or write it in notes, and maybe in the next couple of days I can run a couple of interesting queries. So much for a quick introduction to Sparkle and the query interface and getting the data out of Wikidata, not just via the regular user interface of Wikidata.
Oh, thank you, David. Is that it?
That's it for now. I thought how brief it is. I'm going to limit it to this.
Understood. Yeah, there's only so much we can cover.
I think those were the 10 minutes that I.
Oh yeah, that was perfect.
Yeah, in the end, if you do have time, I don't think so, but if you do have time, we can go further into this, and if there's interest by the other participants.
Yeah, of course. Can I get you to stop sharing your screen? Sure, oh, you've done it already. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go back to where we were before, and my browser, here we go. Share Kenneth Bowman. So can you see this Wikidata page for Kenneth Bowman that we did earlier? Yeah, there's him nodding of heads. Thank you, Siobhan. All I can see, interestingly, all I can see is Siobhan on the screen here. So Kenneth Bowman, while we've been sitting here watching David do this, I've just been scrolling around here looking at this page about Kenneth Bowman that we talked about earlier. Look at this. Collector, lepidopterist, educated at, additional identifiers, find a grave. All of you just sitting here doing this as we're talking. And this is the power of Wikidata, and it is just absolutely phenomenal. So you can see very quickly, you can start building up some information about our Kenneth Bowman. So we step back, and can we make use of this in our own collections data? And so let's make another connection in our flight and our trip, and go into what I'm most interested in personally is my little pet project with Bloodhound. Can you see this? This Bloodhound. Okay. So here is what we've done as a group here is try and parse out all of the collector names and identifiers of specimens throughout all of those institutions that share their data to GBIF. And try and access GBIF data in a way that is very centric to the individual, and build up, you might think of it as a collector profile or an individual profile for an individual's breadth of expertise, if you will, for the kinds of specimens that they've collected, where they've gone in the world. And it's another interesting way of kind of putting all this information together. And it is connected up to both Wikidata and ORCID. So I'm going to log out of this, of my own personal account here. Hopefully it's not going to crash on me while I'm doing this. Log out. Weird. Anyway. I hope I haven't lost my own internet connection. Ah, there we go. Okay, so here's Bloodhound. It is a passion of mine, and it is wired up to ORCID to allow you to connect and pass through your authentication. And if I can get this thing to work quickly enough, those of you who might be on it right now, you're the ones that are making it slow. Let's see what's happening. There we go. So I'm logged in with my own account. I did so through ORCID. And I want to know something about Kenneth Bowman. And the first place I might go is that there's something called agent strings. These are parsed out lists of names in all of the GBIF data, if you will. So if I search for Kenneth Bowman, am I going to get anything? Oh, a little bit. So I've not done anything here. All I've done is kind of search through all of GBIF. And so this is what I mean by agent strings. There's not connected up to an identity of an individual yet. It's just so Kenneth Bowman, one lowly papilio. Not very interesting. But due to the nature of our data across all of our collections, it was very difficult to know who might K Bowman be. There's another variant of the way that we might see Bowman. Bowman. Sure enough, there's lots of those kind of variants, like K Bowman here. There's 18,000 specimens. And look at that, University of Alberta, Lepidoptera. Okay, so how are we going to get this wired up to Wikidata? Well, one way that we can do this is through this Help Others section within Bloodhound. This is where you start attributing specimens to individuals, individual collectors, individual determiners. You can search through by country. So some of this information comes from Wikidata, as it also does come through ORCID. So if you put a country in your own ORCID account, then you know, the chances are you might appear here in a particular country. And new people, latest recipients. So new people, meaning once a night I go scouring through Wikidata, try and find all instances of people that might have particular properties that were in Wikidata. And I'll throw it in to Bloodhound here as a pool of individuals that you might be able to find and attribute specimens to. So that hasn't run because we just added our Kenneth Bowman, but can we at least add him to Bloodhound here? And that is that Q number that you might have seen back here. Kenneth Bowman is Q number. So I'm going to add that here. And because we put in birth date, death date, and some other features in there, it'll flow, I hope, nicely into Bloodhound. That's one of the restrictions that I make here. One of the lines drawn in the sand is that I really would like to have birth dates and death dates, accurate to the day, so that we can try and do things like data quality kind of assessments. Have we come across some specimens purportedly collected by Kenneth Bowman that were before his birth date or after his birth date? Hopefully this is going to start spinning and doing its thing. I've added him. That's one of us in our group here has done that already. Well, there we go. Kenneth Bowman was created or updated. That's okay. So now we got our Kenneth Bowman. What came in? Well, it's Kenneth Bowman, K Bowman, his birth date, death date. He's a collector. He's a lepidopterist. You refresh that Wikidata so that if you add new features, new properties, new values in Wikidata, you can draw them in again, and to make sure we can, we've got sufficient amount of information here to know that this is Kenneth Bowman that we're interested in, not some other K Bowman. So that's one message to bear in mind, is that it's fine to have these identifiers, but it's equally important to have some kind of additional bits of information there so we know that this is Kenneth Bowman, not some other K Bowman. So here we see K Bowman, University of Alberta Museums. These are some Lepidoptera specimens here. And now I can start attributing them. Say, yes, K Bowman, he identified and collected both of that specimen. And I go through these one at a time and added these in, and you get into sort of a rhythm. And that as you're doing this, you're kind of building up your assertions that this is K Bowman, or I can do it in bulk. So I might say that K Bowman is the same across all here, and I'll hit both, or identified, collected. So I continue this page after page, or I can do this offline by downloading these specimens and start attributing them in bulk. So here's this upload tab. And so I could, if I chose to, download a whole bunch of these records and attribute to K Bowman and upload them back as a CSV and do this in bulk. And as you're doing that, you then have opened this up a little bit. And see, here's me way over on the right as the trainer. I'm the one who said, I asserted that that's K Bowman, and he collected it and identified that. So here's another layer of attribution here in the workflow, is who was it that made that assertion? And likewise, potentially some visualizations about those specimens, and say, have any of these been attributed to K Bowman before he was born or after he died? Or maybe some of the identifications made before he was born, after he died. And so immediately you can start getting a sense of, well, there's some power here that would allow us to do things like data quality checks, in addition to just building up someone's profile. And then as I do this, I could say, well, it's not yet been made public. It's all yellow here to tell me it's still kind of private. But I'd like to make this, let's open it up. Let's make it public so that, everyone has an opportunity to see the kinds of things that Kenneth Bowman was engaged in doing while he was alive, and show the breadth of his activities and where he collected. And so there's now Kenneth Bowman's public profile. and show me his specialties, his network of co-collectors, which have not yet been fully fleshed because I've not attributed a number of those specimens. That, you know, he was in Canada. Here's his Wikidata URL, where those specimens are deposited, all the individual specimens, and I can download them as a CSV file if I wanted to, or a JSON LD file. Who was it that attributed those specimens to Kenneth? Well, it was me, for starters. There could be others. And interestingly, what about some of the science that has been enabled by Kenneth Bowman's activities of identifying and collecting specimens? And here's where I go twiddling through GBIF, looking for the publications that have made use of individual specimens, and then behind the scenes attributing these to Kenneth Bowman on an almost semi-automated way. And so this is true for Kenneth as a Wikidata profile, but likewise you can do so with an actual ORCID profile. So if you are a collector, you are a determiner of specimens, you too can create your own profile, make it public as you so choose, and others may attribute specimens to you with your approval, or you can kind of deprecate those kinds of attributions. That wasn't me, for example, that was someone else that shares my same name. And you have what kind of control over that, and build up your own profile that way, and potentially share that out to the wider world. Make use of it on your CV, for example, which a number of you have been doing, which is kind of amazing and remarkable. I think there's a lot of potential here. So I'm conscious of the time, and I see that we are at the 2:45 mark, local for me here in the afternoon. And that gets us back to kind of a return trip, I think. I'm gonna go back to my slides and stop sharing my screen again. It's kind of clunky to do this all the time, but bear with me. I'll stop sharing that. I'll start sharing my slides again. Where are we? There we go. Share that. So there's Siobhan. So we kind of emulated Siobhan's workflow. And we talked about Kenneth Bowman. And we talked about connecting flight and Bloodhound, the importance of ORCID and making your ORCID profile, which is very skimmed over very quickly, and what is ORCID. And who's traveling with us here? You know, a whole bunch of people attributing specimens to others or to themselves in Bloodhound to a remarkable extent. You know, folks like Kyle Kopis, 1.5 million attributions made, which is just phenomenal. And our first return trip, some first lessons. So Sabina here, who might be with us, and Siobhan have noticed when doing this, there is clearly a way that we've kind of constructed our data about specimens and shared it out to the wider world in GBIF that can benefit local collections as these data might potentially come back. And the first thing of note is that Siobhan, time and time again, myself included, even Sabina and others have been doing this, who oftentimes see historic specimen labels that say Dr. and Mrs. John Northrop, for example. And what gets recorded in our own data and shared out to the world is Dr. John Northrop, and the Mrs. gets dropped, which is really sad and unfortunate. And so unknowingly, we might have erased the contributions that women and other notable folk might have been making in our collections data. And so it's the first lesson is that there are aspects to the way in which we share our data or encode our data in our own collections that need to be adjusted very carefully. And we might not have been aware of that until we get a sense of how we go about attributing specimens to people. So add the Mrs. field into your collections data if that's not present. I see Deb is raising her hand. Maybe she's got a question.
Maybe we could let Quentin in.
Let Quentin in?
Let Quentin in, yes.
Ooh, he's waiting.
So someone in the chat says, Matthias is.
Yes.
Yes. We're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds here, but I know Matthias has got some steps he wants to demonstrate. So the first bit of return trip, getting back to home, and home being our own personal collections, for example, our institutional collections. What have we learned so far? Well, Wikidata is relatively easy to make contributions to. It's relatively easy as a broker to manage these identifiers. We see that we might get identity of people and the way in which you kind of stitch these data together. Who else might be already taking advantage of this kind of workflow? And I wanted to turn that over to Matthias, who is at Meisy Botanic Gardens. And I will stop sharing my screen and share it out to him so that he can do a demo. Are you ready, Matthias?
Yes, well, I don't really have a demo ready.
However you want to structure it.
I prepared some notes and some external links people can consult after I'm done. And of course, if there are any questions afterwards, you can always contact me. I'll post what I made into the Google Doc, and then I'll try to go over it very briefly. So what I wanted to talk about is at Meisy, we've been working quite a bit on linking the collectors of our specimens to external identifiers, Wikidata among others. And we've now reached a level where we've linked quite a lot, I would say. And I wanted to briefly talk about the way we've done that and how far we've gotten. So as a starting point for our herbarium, we have a collector table, which has very limited metadata, but at least it links our specimens together with IDs, not just strings that can be formatted in various different ways. And if you don't have that, of course, you can always start by just listing the unique strings you have and start lumping them together and compile some dates. You might not have the date of birth or the date of death, but at least a date when that person was alive and functioning based on when they collected their specimens. And in practice, we took more or less two approaches. The initial one was to ask one of our technicians to go to the most prominent collector IDs we had, and then look into 4 repositories, that is Wikidata, ORCID, Harvard Index of Botanists, and VF, and see if we can find records in there that match those persons for sure. And for Wikidata in specific, actually, if there was someone not there, of course, he could just make an item for them, because that's the big advantage of Wikidata. And this way we got quite far, but then we did a second approach, which in retrospect would probably be better suited as the initial approach, which is do an automated matching of all these names to Wikidata items. And if you link them to Wikidata items by extension, you can also link to various other identifiers which are present in Wikidata. And if you do this first, then of course you get a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and you don't have to expend much more energy in linking those ones. And you can also take the workflow that you first try to find a whole bunch of possible links and then vet them, rather than having to go to all the different repositories manually. Of course, for an automated approach, I will go into a bit more detail about it a bit later. You need some validation, because there will always be incorrect links. And validation in our case, we did by requesting metadata of the resources we linked. That could be like VF, Harvard, ORCID. Various of these have APIs or other ways you can retrieve the data of them and see if they match specifically. And also, if you have multiple approaches to linking, if 2 approaches independently link the same thing, the match is more likely to be correct. And finally, making all these links available. In our case, we've done that by putting them into our machine-readable rendition of our specimen data. I put some examples in the Google Doc from our data portal. And we've also now, as David said before, recorded by ID is now available on GBIF, and we've uploaded them to, in our dataset, to GBIF. I put an example where you can actually see the specimens on the map of a collector of our herbarium, but actually through a unique identifier and not just a name string. And so the current status of all that is that we have more than 1 million of our specimens linked, out of what we have digitized, about 1.8 million, which consists of 1,700 unique persons and more than 5,000 identifiers for these people. The downside with how it's done for now on GBIF is that it's just one ID for each person. So you have to choose if there's multiple options, which might be different authorities, ORCID, VF, and other ones. But you also have the problem that some of these have duplicates themselves. So if you want to take the VF ID, there might be 6 or even 10 of those, and then which one you pick. And if some other organization is doing the same thing and they pick a different one, it becomes more difficult to match specimens together this way. And finally, the automated approach, I made a more detailed presentation about that at the Mobilize Wikidata workshop in Warsaw. I put a link to where it hopefully should be accessible to everyone. And the R code that basically underlies this is available on my GitHub. I don't think it's too technical, and I think with some modifications, it should be applicable by other institutions. And the general idea is that I made some Sparkle queries looking for person items, so instances of human, which have as a property certain biodiversity-related identifiers. So similar to the properties that have been shown before, botanist, biologist, we also have the properties of certain identifiers like IPNI, author ID, BHL, creator ID, zoobank identifiers, all of these. And these are people, if you find them, which are potentially collectors of specimens, as they have these sort of identifiers already. And looking into that space, I did a fuzzy matching approach of the names with a filter on the dates that I could amass. So this was done using our data primarily, but I've also tinkered around with it with using some of the Bloodhound agent strings and see if we could match up those. I didn't get too far with that because of the fact that the GBIF IDs for occurrences don't persist, which was a bit of a problem. But I think this could be quite useful for other institutions who want to do this sort of thing. And if you want to do the manual vetting first, that's definitely doable. But I think there are quite some advantages to first try and sort of automated matching, which could quite save you some work. And I think that's briefly what I wanted to show. Is there any?
And you're okay, Matthias, for now?
Yeah, I saw some comments, but I didn't have any, like, I can't really multitask to.
Yeah, I know what that's all about, yeah. I didn't see any questions in there that were directed directly at you. But if we missed them, please, by all means, put them in our Google Doc, and we'll get to them asynchronously. I'm also aware of the time. We're at 2:56 at the moment, and I want to make a few concluding statements before everyone gets dispersed, if that's all right. So I'm going to share my screen and go back to the slide briefly. So thank you, Matthias, for that. So planning the next trip. So where do we go next? And how does this all kind of loop back to our own collections? How are we going to share data back out again in a way that potentially might make use of recorded by ID, identified by ID, or some other mechanism? So, you know, of course, we could absolutely take advantage of that recorded by ID or identified by ID to have our data go right back out to GBIF again and close that loop. But another way of doing it, which may or may not be more appropriate depending on your particular use case, is some of the work that's been underway at the moment, which kind of sidesteps this recorded by ID, identified by ID, and have a bit more robust way of sharing the identity of people and the actions that they take. And some of this thinking has emerged from the Research Data Alliance, thinking about actions that people take, the roles that they might have had within the context of that particular action, and the agent involved in those actions. How do you properly model that in the context of the taxonomic databases working group biodiversity information standards, so that we can kind of codify this as a standard and not merely a GBIF namespace, but in a way that would allow our data to be shared potentially more broadly and even well beyond the context of GBIF. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this at the moment, that we're working on an extension for Darwin Core, which is a blend of terms that we use in our community to try and codify this in a bit more robust way. And that should be under, at least in development and production, middle of the summer. Just had a nice chat this morning about pushing this along even further. We're there, we're almost there. And we'll get there very, very quickly. In the meantime, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen once more so I can go back to something else. How do we get this agent data, people data, back in our own collections? What is the mechanism for that? So we kind of, on our connecting trips, we put data out into GBIF, it comes back into Bloodhound. How do we get that back in our own personal collections databases that can eventually get shared out in a more robust way? Well, I don't really have an answer for that yet at the moment, but we do have a potential working solution. I know at least one of us in our community is taking advantage of this. And I'm going to show that here, back to my Bloodhound interface. You see that? University of Alberta E.H. Strickland Entomological Museum. So we were attributing specimens to our friend Kenneth. He now appears here on one of the 73 people that has had specimens attributed to him, Kenneth Bowman, right here in the middle. We'll definitely get more as we go through this, and I'll probably do a little bit more tonight, flesh out Kenneth's profile a little bit more. But I got this link called Frictionless Data. And I rebuild these once a month or so. And what is that frictionless data? Well, it's kind of like a Darwin Court archive. I'm going to download that, and bear with me while I extract this and have a look at this. It's just a zip document, a bunch of CSV files in it. One of which is attributions, one of which is occurrences, and one of which is users. And users is a flat list of people. So all these little CSV files are connected in a relational way. So you get a flat list of users, and those are connected with occurrences that we kind of made the attributions to. And a list of attributions, which is kind of like our little digital annotations. So in there will be me, because I attributed some specimens of Kenneth to Kenneth using his identifier, or this flat list of users. And if I open this up in a text file, or in a spreadsheet, I'm not sharing that, am I? I'm not sharing that. Yeah, all right. That's bugger of this Zoom interface that doesn't quite permit this, does it? Stop sharing. I'll share the screen again. There we go. So anyway, you probably didn't see that University of Strickland, did you? Anyway, I'll promise you, it was there, the Strickland Library, or the Strickland Entomological Collection, University of Alberta. Here in this spreadsheet that you're looking at now are this flat list of people, 72, 73-ish people. Kenneth Bowman here somewhere eventually once I rebuild this. But here, list of people, relatively simple, I would hope, to put in your collections. Some alternate names that have come from Wikidata, come from ORCID, and joined to that, here's their identifiers, the same as the birth dates, death dates that pulled from Wikidata, the Wikidata identifier, the ORCID identifier, et cetera, et cetera. So, a nice, relatively clean list of people that if you've got an agents table already, I would hope that you might have an opportunity to stitch that into your agents table. And like I mentioned, the other CSV files in there include things like the attributions made to the particular occurrence record. So I hope, among all of that, is an opportunity to roll it back into your collections management system and close the loop and complete your travel, your vacations, if you will, and close that loop for how all these data get stitched together and made use of. So let's see if I have any other slides. I don't think I did. What I wanted to do is kind of open this up for discussion. I know we've gone just past our hour. And I was hoping that we might open this up for question and answers and everyone get a chance to step in and add something if they wanted to say something. So if you have to go, by all means, go ahead, be with your family, do what you need to do. If you want to stick around for another 5-6 minutes, you're more than welcome to, or we can open up for questions and dialogue. So why don't we do that? Let's go till 3:10, another 7 minutes, and we'll open the floor up for questions. And I hope, poor Nicole Fisher, I see she just wanted to she was in her waiting room this whole time. Sorry, Nicole. Anyway, so if you've got questions, please.
You might want to explain that people have a chance, if they've missed the actual meeting, to see the recording of it.
Yes, so I just remind folks that this is being recorded. Yeah, and then I haven't yet decided where this is going to go. But I'll put a link, maybe YouTube or something, if I can manage to upload that presentation into our Google spreadsheet so that we can find this thing again. Is that what you mean, Sirvan?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We've had a question, or I had a discussion with Andrew about how to get live people into Bloodhound, and he tried using, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, the Wikidata item, a number, instead of the ORCID ID to get a live person into into Bloodhound tracker. So I just wanted to clarify that you use the Wikidata item if it exists for dead people, and the ORCID ID for alive people. People
Yes,
are alive.
that's right. Yeah, it's been very explicitly designed that way because the orchid people, those who have orchids must be living by default, because you have to be warm, alive, and being able to click buttons and assert that this is me and my ORCID account. And that's the decision that ORCID has made from the very beginning. Whereas it's a bit of a free-for-all in Wikidata. And the intention of that, at least in the context of Bloodhound, was that it would be lovely to be able to stitch other things together to one's ORCID profile. So if you put your list of your own publications in your ORCID, maybe at some point in the future, there's an opportunity to kind of close yet other loops with ORCID and kind of lift up that ecosystem as much as possible to make best use of it. Maybe at some point in the future, I kind of be a bit more relaxed in that kind of constraint within Bloodhound. It's open for discussion, but at the moment, yes, you're right. Wikidata for the deceased, ORCID for the living. That might be completely different in your own way of organizing your data in your own collections, but at least that's how things are within Bloodhound anyway.
Chrissy has asked in the chat about someone who experiences this process wrote a how to get started document. Well, I do this manually and I tweet it out, basically a very simple, basic, doing it manually, one collector at a time workflow, which David's already mentioned, and you were planning on linking, David?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So links to your tweets, for example. Yeah, I'll put that in the Google Doc as soon as we finish up here. Just doing too many things at once. Yeah, there's definitely some value in that. You think of all the breadth of the number of collectors in the world, and there's most certainly going to be sort of a parabolic curve, not parabolic, but kind of a curve where most of the specimens are going to be collected by a handful of individuals the world over. And there's going to be this long tail of unknown folk who've contributed 1 or 2 specimens to a collection. How are you going to attribute those records to them? In many cases, maybe it's not even worth doing, but in other cases, there are stories worth uncovering there that kind of enrich how we tell the stories about our collections. And if you could just access that information a little bit. And this is the importance of the local knowledge. The reason why I went and found Kenneth Bowman is because I knew something about where Kenneth was, where he was living, what he was doing. And that kind of knowledge is embedded in all of us. And we've got to find ways to tap into that, because clearly there's ways of engaging folk in this front. There's no reason why we, as collection managers, for example, should give up. There's opportunities. Any other questions or comments? I was hoping.
I have
Sorry,
one, but I mean, I can come up with, you guys all know me, most of you, I can come up with hundreds. So anyway, my first one, very practical on the misses issue. I mean, I see that as a real challenge with things like the drop downs, the way they're currently done in collection management systems and the way drop downs can get changed, but also with the, as Chauvin has so eloquently shown us, and Lou Musetti, as how people look at labels and misinterpret what they're seeing there, and understanding when that really represents a female and potentially a spouse. So those are harder than just saying put an identifier on a name. Those involve getting the databases changed, getting the standards of practice changed. I would like to know if we could have a conversation another time about how to do that, what do we put out as a best practice suggestion for helping people to figure out what they need to change to fix that?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't have an immediate answer for that, but
No.
I mean, clearly the one take-home message here is that if we're really in the business of attributing things properly to people, we ought to be as thorough as we best can, even if it's making adjustments to our collections management system.
Yeah.
The last thing we want to be doing is misattributing specimens to folk or having them completely evaporate from our history of knowledge.
Quentin wants to weigh in.
Quentin's got his hand up.
Yeah, so I came late to the party because it got to like 7 o'clock and I put a movie on and things. So sorry about that. So if I missed a bit, then sorry. But we do have quite a few documents that came out of the pre-conference workshop in Biodiversity Next. One was on disambiguation. Rilini is working up into some sort of best guidance practice for disambiguation. Several of the people here are involved in that. I could probably put some links into the Google Doc on that, but it's worth thinking about. So things like gender are already relevant there, but we came up with all sorts of different ways to disambiguate people. And Wikidata can be quite crucial in that. Matthias and I are always arguing about the best way to link up, and I really like the manual way because you can work on just the really common collectors, and because there's this great curve, you can cover a lot of people with just doing things manually. And if you've got no technical expertise whatsoever, you can still link people and link a very large amount of your specimens manually without doing any technical work. But Matthias is right, with a bit of technical expertise and some marvelous sparkle, then you can deal with that long tail with some very nice string matching as well. Just some comments.
Yeah. So we've gone to the full time and about 10 minutes beyond. I think it's probably a good time as any to draw it to a close. I hope there was sufficient amount of information here for you folk and our extended community to kind of get your feet wet a little bit into Wikidata and start making some progress there. If you share your data to GBIF, there's an opportunity to engage your staff. If you're a collection manager sitting on some data, trying to get your staff doing some work while we wait out this period. So that there's no reason why we can't do some things as a community and get them on Twitter at the very least, so that we can start sharing this in a more open way. And I hope that there was something here that you've been able to take back to your group and your staff and take advantage of it. And we're always here for you. So stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. I hope you can get through this as best you can. From all accounts, sounds like we're going to have to do this again in the fall, from what I understand. There'll be cycles of this kind of stay at home until we have a full-fledged vaccine that will be distributed. So stay healthy and stay happy. And don't feel alone, please. Reach out as much as you can. So, cheers. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Lovely to see you. So
Bye.
many lovely faces. Bye. Bye, Siobhan. Hi.
Hi. Hi, Dee.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
David, did you stop the recording?
I haven't yet. Let me see if I can do that. Too many things. I've lost minutes.
I know.
There we go.